Rise of the Ronin is now out, a game which finally forced me to go out and pick up a PS5, just so I could play it, and give you all my thoughts, opinions, and eventually a full review. This video will simply serve to give you those initial feelings I have for it, before eventually releasing my full analysis of the game later on. I'm deciding to go about things this way this time, being that normally I tend to spend a week or more playing through the game before I am finally able to put out my review. I don't necessarily feel that this is the most ideal way to do things, as I often feel stressed to play through the game as quick as possible while also spending every free moment I have during my day playing the game. On top of that, by the time I do release my review, the hype for the game has already died down a little bit, and normally my reviews don't do as well by then. So I wanted to make a compromise and try out making 2 videos this time. One video of my first thoughts, and then later, after taking more time to play through the game without feeling so rushed, my actual full review. I also have to say that I was lucky enough to receive a review copy of the game from Sony and PlayStation on the day prior to release, which is what you are seeing me playing here. Alright, so with all of that out of the way, how am I feeling about Rise of the Ronin after roughly a couple nights of playing it? So far, I have mixed feelings. There is a lot I could already get into, but I do want to save plenty of it for my actual full review. Additionally, there is a fair chance that a good amount of what I mentioned here will be addressed again in my coming review, albeit with further thoughts after having finished the game. So, the best way that I can describe Rise of the Ronin is by saying that it marries a bunch of concepts together that we have seen from several games in recent years. To put it in extremely simple terms, it is the time period and characters of Like a Dragon Ishin, the exploration and gathering of Ghost of Tsushima, and expanded combat systems from the Nioh series. Does this game do any of its features better than those games? Well, let's dive in and discuss what I think so far. Let's start off with the story. I don't like the story, at least not yet. I think I'm only about 30% through the actual story as of right now, but its initial setup has not been good. The game starts off by throwing you full speed into an introduction before coming to a screeching halt with the character creator. I will say though that I love games that allow you to create or customize your character in some way. I can spend hours in character customization screens, and I'm happy to say that this game has one of the best character customizers that I've ever seen. There are so many unique ways to customize your character and even save customizations for future playthroughs. I initially made a character that looked like Shimazu Yoshihiro from the Samurai Warrior series, before then saving that design and instead going for one that looked a little bit more like Japanese soccer/football player Daizen Maeda, albeit with a bushier mustache. You also have a twin that you can customize as well. I didn't initially realize this, but you can also change the gender of your twin, so I decided to give myself a brother instead of a sister. Following this though, you are then thrown back into a whirlwind of events. Although my full review will have spoilers, for this video, since it's so close to the game's release, I will try not to. But basically, you and your twin are part of a shadowy group called the Veiled Edge, which is working against the shogunate here in the 1850s, well into the midst of the Bakumatsu era. For those of you unaware, this is the fascinating point in history when American warships arrived in Japan to demand that Japan open its borders to trade with the West, thus beginning a domino effect of changes as the old Tokugawa shogunate falls into turmoil and later collapse. Now this group, the Veiled Edge that you are a part of, would be interesting if we actually knew anything about them. But no, instead the initial setup is filled with characters who the game tries to make you care about for 3 minutes until then getting rid of. On top of that, there is also way too many ninja for my own liking. They leaned heavily into the pop culture ninja portrayal instead of a more accurate approach, and it just feels extremely cliche. Eventually though, we set off for Yokohama, where the game truly begins. It's here where we are introduced to many more unique characters, some of which being real historical figures like Sakamoto Ryoma, someone who I think would be much more interesting if our character actually talked to them, instead of just staring at them and occasionally grunting. Now I will say that if I recall correctly, I think this is also how the player character acted in the Nioh games as well, as basically the silent protagonist. And I'll also add that the game does give you interesting branching dialogue options on occasion as well. I have heard that player choice does come to impact the story, or at least I hope it does, because it could be really exciting to see how that works out. Player choice impacting the story is something which is very limited to almost not a factor at all in games like Ghost of Tsushima and Like a Dragon Ishin, so I'd love to see player choice actually have a massive effect in this game here. The last thing I'll say about the story is that the pacing also starts to improve once you reach Yokohama, so I am hopeful. I'll let you know what my final thoughts are once we get to the actual review. Besides the story though, I do have to say that everything else I've experienced so far has been actually pretty good. As soon as the game sets you loose into the open world of Japan, you can really set off in any direction to start doing whatever you want, and it's here the game started to finally shine. First off, I have to comment on the open world. What is it actually like? Well, number one, it is beautiful. However, I want to make a clear distinction here between the open world in Rise of the Ronin versus the open world in Ghost of Tsushima. It's no secret that a lot of details in this open world were inspired by elements from how Sucker Punch did their world in Tsushima. Both gathering and exploration are extremely similar. See that glowing flower? You can collect that resource. See that cloud of smoke? That's where enemies are. So far, I don't think the game innovates too much in any way from what Ghost of Tsushima did. However, I will say, I much prefer the look of this world far more than that of Tsushima. While Tsushima looked like an Americanized postcard Japan, basically overly beautiful and vibrant scenery everywhere you look, Rise of the Ronin gives you much more of a realistic look at Japan. Sure, there are plenty of scenic areas, but there are also plenty of just normal or even run-down locations too. Things just feel more natural and normal, which I found to greatly appreciate when compared to the overly stylized Tsushima. If there is one part of the world though that I can make a gripe about, it's that when you are deeper into the city itself, it just feels way too deserted. Compare that now to the city streets of Kyoto in Like a Dragon Ishin. There is a massive difference, as the city here just feels much more alive. Yet, getting out of the city, exploration feels extremely rewarding as well, as wherever you go, you have chances of finding awesome loot. Both weapons, armor, and other materials. You didn't have that in Ghost of Tsushima, being that we acquired gear differently in that game. And while in terms of melee weapons we are kind of just locked to a sword in Ghost of Tsushima, Rise of the Ronin goes miles beyond that in terms of combat. At first I wasn't really certain if I liked the combat in Rise of the Ronin, but the more I play it and continue to get better with it, the more I begin to really enjoy it. It's obviously difficult, being that it follows in the same footsteps of the Dark Souls and Nioh style of gameplay, a style which I often have a hard time enjoying. But so far I've actually really liked the approach they've done with it in Rise of the Ronin. Finding difficult enemies or a boss feels like an appropriate level of challenging for me, and I never felt too deep in over my head, but instead it tested out how I can best utilize my skills and memory of their abilities to take them down. But that's not even talking about how weapons come into play. The game has many different types of weapons and fighting styles, from the katana to dual wielding, yari spears, naginata, nodachi, rifles, bows, and arrows, and I imagine much more. There is so many directions you can take in terms of fighting, and that's not even mentioning the fact that each weapon has multiple fighting stances to master as well. It's clear the sheer amount of depth that is on display here, and I can't wait to explore it more as I get deeper into the game. Just writing about it here makes me want to jump back in and keep playing the game to see what else I can uncover, which is what I think I'm going to do. The game is calling me and I'm going to jump back into it and keep playing it because yes, I am having a good time with Rise of the Ronin, all things considered. My main problem, of course, so far just stems from the story being a bit too poorly paced and developed, but we'll see if that changes as things go on. I'm not sure how long it will take before I get my full review out. I imagine a couple weeks perhaps, but we'll see. I want to make sure I'm taking my time with this one so that I can fully explore it and enjoy what it has to offer, while not feeling too rushed or forcing myself through it in any way. So keep an eye out for my full review when it finally arrives, so you can see what my actual verdict is on Rise of the Ronin, as well as other interesting historical details we can get deeper into when we talk about spoilers for the story. But with that said, have you started playing Rise of the Ronin yet? If so, what do you think about it so far? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most interesting.